I think it's about time to get things underway. And we're going to be starting off this morning with UAP response training for public safety professionals. We've got two individuals who are going to be joining us, one of them remotely. First, we'll start with a gentleman who we heard from yesterday because of his participation in the UAP Intentions Study, one of the many projects that's underway currently with the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. And I love those projects. The projects panel yesterday, for anybody who missed that, I highly recommend logging in via the Hoover app, catch the replay of that, make sure that you hear about the projects that we're working on. We've got a fascinating drone study, several very unique studies, one involving USOs. So lots to catch up on there. But today, Sean Grosvenor is going to be talking about the UAP response training aspect of this. He'll be joined by Dr. Keith Taylor. First, let's introduce formally Mr. Grosvenor, who is a forensic consultant, retired from the Illinois State Police. Over his 25-year career, he served in various special assignments, including major crimes task forces, internal affairs, crime scene investigations, and executive command. Sean is a court-qualified expert in bloodstain pattern analysis and firearms, has testified in over 40 trials, and is a graduate of the University of Illinois at Chicago, and served as an adjunct instructor for the UIC Master of Forensic Science program. He'll be joining us here in-house. Coming in remotely, Dr. Keith Taylor, an adjunct assistant professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, has an extensive background in law enforcement and emergency management. His career spans various roles, including 25 years as a retired NYPD sergeant, special assignment, and assistant commissioner for the New York City Correction Department. Dr. Taylor's expertise as a law enforcement professional includes weapons of mass destruction response supervisor, as well as a planning team manager for FEMA Urban Search and Rescue New York Task Force number 1. He's a graduate of Howard University, City College of New York, the Naval Postgraduate School, and Columbia University. Please make welcome Dr. Kate Taylor and also Sean Grosvenor.
Welcome to this presentation on UAP awareness and response training for public safety professionals. Thank you, Mr. Hanks. Today, Sean and I will discuss essential public safety training considerations, investigative approaches, and critical interagency coordination. We would like to thank organizers Richard Hoffman and Robert Powell and the rest of the SCU for this opportunity to present, with special thanks to Mr. Ivan Hennell and Dr. Joshua Pearson for their invaluable contributions to this presentation. Next slide. Our aim is to ensure public safety professionals clearly understand the history of and the current government response to UAP. Notably, a 2023 survey of the 300 largest U.S. police agencies inquiring about their UAP incident response training, equipment, and policies revealed a significant gap. No established standard operating procedures exist for UAP incident response or reporting. This presentation will examine introductory public safety training for UAP incident response, standard operating procedures, initial response and assessment, handling contacts and encounters, communication skills, interagency coordination and information sharing, and continuing education and awareness about UAP. Next slide. There are a number of different areas that are of significant consequence when dealing with not just law enforcement or public safety professionals, but any population unfamiliar with UAP or the history of it. It's important to provide information, facts, and evidence that they can consume, accept, and understand. This would include a history of not only key encounters, but also our government's response to them, as well as how individuals, government agencies, and other stakeholders have responded to sightings, contacts, and encounters. The goal is to provide an overview that lays a foundation to allow public safety professionals to not just understand the reality of this issue, but also to understand the significance of their role in protecting the public against any possible related hostile or adversarial interactions. Next slide, public links of NHI. We've got public reports going back to 1947, where you see the Roswell Daily Record with that famous headline about the military capturing a flying saucer on the ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. And then, of course, quickly backtracking on that statement, they've been doing so for about 80 years. You also have the entertainment industry, which has capitalized on the subject through the many films about NHI and contact with human beings. For instance, In the movie Close Encounter, scientists who were heavily involved in government UAP investigations, like Dr. Jacques Vallée and Dr. J. Allen Hynek, consulted for the film. The character in the film was partially based on Dr. Vallée, and Dr. Hynek had a cameo. The film Fire in the Sky it was based on an actual account of an individual who was abducted while his coworkers watched. The film Communion was based on an abduction account, and the picture of the NHI, the non-human intelligence, on the book cover resulted in thousands of letters being written to the author from individuals who saw the picture, which triggered perhaps a response, a recognition of a personal experience or encounter that they themselves had or thought they had with that NHI. Next slide. If you look at the screenshot of the unknown footage, commonly known as Skinny Bob there, the 1990 drawings of NHI by the patients of the Dr. John Mack. You can see the Alien Discussions Conference there. The drawings from individuals of the NHI they encountered, the drawings from the aerial school students from the 1994 Zimbabwe school UAP encounter. There is a consistent description of what people are reporting of NHI that they are seeing and encountering. This is by no means symbolic of all NHI encountered, as Dr. Eric Davis spoke recently about at a recent congressional briefing of, quote, greys, tall Nordics, reptilians, and insectoid type humanoids, unquote, as well. Okay, slide 6, government disclosure on NHI. In December 2017, there was a release of those videos, which was then acknowledged by the federal government that they were actually unknown objects, technologies that we don't have and account for, and that have capabilities that go beyond anything we have in our inventory, as well as any other nation that we're aware of around the world. And then we have 3 credible witnesses, Ryan Graves, David Grush, and David Fravor, all with the U.S. military, who testified to what they observed directly relative to their experience with UAP. Then we have the creation of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which was set up to take military reports of UAP. And then we have the legislation that is being pursued for the disclosure of UAP currently in the way of the UAP bill. It's HR 1187, the bill that has been entered to Congress by Representative Burchett about the release of UAP documents. The picture on the PowerPoint is of the UAP Disclosure Act, which was unsuccessfully attempted for passage last year and the year before. It was only partially passed. Okay, slide 8. Confirmation of UAP. Even though there was a confirmation from government in 2021, today in 2025, we're still waiting for confirmation on what witnesses told David Grush that was the subject of the Intelligence Community Inspector General complaint. This includes the crash retrieval programs, the reverse engineering programs. Do they have non-human biologics or not? Are the objects that we're currently seeing in our skies, lands, and oceans human or non-human technology? Slide 9. Only because of previous government confirmation, we collectively are currently in an age of disclosure as opposed to an age of discovery. We no longer need to debate whether UAP exists, and instead are demanding knowledge about long-standing, highly classified government UAP recovery and reverse engineering programs. Whereas the public reaction is initial denial, disinterest, disbelief, dismay, and disgust when they understand the reality of the cover-up of the phenomenon, to the point of final acceptance, and collectively, what do we do from here? Slide 10. So understanding standard operating procedures. Currently, there's an absence of consistent, coherent SOPs at state and local levels. Our goal is to establish clear guidelines to standardize initial responses and evidence collection processes. Slide 11. As part of responding to UAP incidents, public safety professionals have to have an understanding of standard operating procedures. As with any investigation into any matter, they have to look at the evidence. And so let's talk about evidence. Slide 12. You have categories of evidence. The first, testimonial evidence, verbal or written statements, slide 13. You also have demonstrative evidence, photographs, diagrams, video, instrumented data, slide 14. Physical evidence, the physical items that establish a connection between the observer, the scene, and an unknown factor. And then slide 15, thank you. Key characteristics of UAP sightings. You have different types. You have the visual observation, where sightings primarily involve testimonial statements that vary based on perspective, memory, and interpretation. You may have a lack of interaction. Typically, there's no direct interaction between the observer and the UAP, at least non-physical. The variability sightings cover a wide range of phenomena, from lights in the sky to structured craft of unknown origin and documentation. Many sightings are documented through photographs, video, radar, or other electronic data. Slide 16, key characteristics of UAPs for contacts, not sightings, contacts. These incidents involve close engagements, often within a few hundred meters of the observer. Direct interaction, the observers may perceive communication or interaction with the UAP or its occupants, whether physical, auditory, or telepathic. And physical evidence, physical traces such as burn marks, ground impressions, or electromagnetic effects on nearby objects are sometimes reported. Slide 17. And so, key characteristics of encounters. Encounter reports often involve the unwilling or unconscious transportation of individuals to a UAP. So, physical interaction would include directive physical interaction or examination within UAP, and within the UAP by its occupants, and that may occur during these encounters. Missing time. Many individuals report experiencing missing time or time distortions associated with their encounters. With recurrent episodes, some report multiple encounters throughout their lifetimes. And vivid recollection. Detailed recall of experiences is common, sometimes aided by techniques such as hypnosis. And so the psychological and emotional impact, it can lead to significant psychological and emotional effects ranging from trauma and fear to a sense of enlightenment or transformation. Now, in 2024, the Major City Chiefs Association UAP Reference Guide was released, allowing law enforcement executives nationwide to have a guide, a foundational document to raise awareness and encourage reporting of UAP incidents among law enforcement. So, some strong points. This is a normalization of UAP reporting. The guide encourages officers to take UAP sightings seriously, reducing stigma and promoting accurate reporting. Comprehensive overview provides a broad survey of UAP-related topics, including government programs, whistleblower accounts, legislative developments, and offering officers, in particular the executives, agencies, a well-rounded understanding of the issue. Another strong point was the inclusion of credible sources. They referenced official reports and testimonies, such as those from ARROW and former intelligence officials. So that allows the guide to lend credibility to this information presented within it. And then awareness of safety risks. The guide highlights potential safety concerns for law enforcement, particularly for air support units, emphasizing the importance of caution during UAP encounters. There are also areas where improvement occurs because there's lack of specific protocols. It doesn't provide any detailed procedures for officers to follow during UAP encounters, which could lead to inconsistent responses. There's limited training guidance. There's an absence of recommendations for training programs or exercises to prepare officers for potential UAP incidents. No fault of their own, because there are no training programs or exercises to prepare officers for potential UAP incidents. There's insufficient legal framework. The guide does not address legal implications or jurisdictional challenges that may arise during UAP investigations. Again, this has not yet been developed. And minimal integration with existing systems. There's no information about UAP reporting should be integrated into current law enforcement reporting and data management systems. And so that is, again, those are areas of improvement, but not necessarily for MCCA. There are other stakeholders that are involved. Slide 19, the UAP Transparency Act. It's what I mentioned earlier, HR 1187 for the 119th Congress. Key provisions include mandatory declassification. All UAP-related records held by federal agencies must be reviewed and declassified within 270 days of the bill's enactment. There is a presumption of disclosure. The bill assumes that all records should be disclosed to the public, and any decision to withhold must be narrowly tailored and justified. Quarterly progress reports. The agencies must submit regular updates to Congress detailing their compliance with the law. And for oversight, the NARA, National Archives and Records Administration, would be involved in preserving and facilitating public access to the records. So this would apply across federal agencies, including DoD, CIA, NSA, ASA, and others. And right now, it's still in the introductory phase, pending further action by the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. And its future progression will depend on legislative priorities and the level of bipartisan support it garners. Okay, so that is, okay, Sean?
All right, Keith, thank you for that overview. So now we're going to talk about initial response and assessment. So when we're considering our initial response and assessment for all of our researchers and investigators, we want to keep in mind that this is a very broad issue. We have our nuts and bolts, and we have our contact issues. We have our psychological aspects. We have our sociological aspects as it relates to disclosure. So I'm going to start with our technological aspects, which deals with the signature analysis, image analysis, audio analysis, chemical analysis, environmental testing, functional analysis, and intelligence analysis. All of these things are the methods by which we identify what exactly do we have. So in signature analysis, and we had quite a few presentations that talked about ways to characterize UAP. This was adapted from bloodstain pattern analysis, size, shape, distribution of a bloodstain, but what this is applying to is UAP characteristics. So size, if measurement can be taken. It's very difficult when the object is unknown as far as its distance. The shape in terms of its geometric characterization. The color, that should be RGB, not RBG, sorry, Ruth, that red, green, and blue. Texture, the qualitative state of solid, liquid, or gas state. Distribution, how many of them are there? The appearance, overall, what does it look like? The change, is there a time sequence for observable changes and the effects that, the changes that we're observing to the environment? So for signature analysis, in terms of prior studies, just a few things here. There's a laundry list of studies that have been done, great studies, but just a few. The Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, characteristic study, which was mentioned a few times here at the conference, the intentions study, which has 4 papers published that collected reports between 1945 and 1975. We need more comprehensive data to predict what is happening currently and, more importantly, what's happening in the future. Dr. Joshua Pearson did his doctoral dissertation on detective signatures for UAP. It is a must-read for anyone involved in research in this area. In 1992, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology allowed for a conference to be held at their university, the Proceedings of the Abduction Study Conference, which gave quite a bit of description as to not only UFO characterizations, but contact with NHI. The Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experience conducted a survey of over 300 people reporting contact with NHI or other experiences, otherwise known as the FREEZE study. So here's a list, and I won't go over each and every one of these things, but if you get a file, whether it be a video file or an audio file, if you right-click and go to Properties and then go to Details, we should see as many of these items as possible. If you see something that says Adobe Photoshop, that's not going to work. That indicates that is an edited file and is not going to give us provenance for the image. We need the original file, and so these are just some of the things that we should be looking at. The date, time that the image was taken, the dimensions, if it is an image file, some other things that are, again, the f-stop, which is the aperture, which gives us the depth of field, exposure time, which is basically the shutter speed that will determine, how or why the image might be blurred, the ISO setting, the sensitivity to light. These are all just some of the metrics that will identify the conditions under which the photograph or the video was taken. If we don't have that information, we can't validate the photo, and therefore we're limited in terms of our analysis and determination as to a valid observation. So from the data collection, we also have data analysis. We also need to know who's analyzing, not only who collected the photo, but who's conducting the analysis. So, is the instrument calibrated? Have we validated that we have the original data file? Do we have the date, time, and location? And those are some of the technical characteristics. And as far as the examination, when we look at the image, we're looking at things like functional characteristics. Is what's characterized in the photo consistent with function? Can we tell what is happening there? Very basic stuff. Historical relevance. If the photo is purported to be from the 1980s, is the architecture or landscape consistent with what the photo purports to be? Geometric integrity. This goes to the quality of the photo itself, where if the edges of a particular shape seem to be blurred out, that would be an indication of editing. Light, exposure, contrast, as well as shadows and reflection. Those are all qualitative aspects of the photo that can be analyzed through physics. If the light is cast on one side, the shadow should be on the other side, depending on where the object is. If that shadow is inconsistent, that would be an indication of potential editing. The same for reflections. So, as we look at our images, we want to examine all of these different elements for the quality of the photo and for the data validation to determine whether the image has been modified or not. Audio analysis, again, these are just some of the things that we'd be looking for in terms of data validation and, of course, to determine whether or not it's been edited. When we look at environmental testing, in the event that there's a scene, we have kind of two lines here. We have the scene and then any object that might be located at the scene. So for the scene, a scene specialist, we'd want to look at for the presence of any radiation that might be in the air, a burned surface, a structure that might have been displaced, or an impression that might have been left by reported landing gear, a footwear impression, or any object that might provide context as to contact from an unknown object with the structure. As far as a UAP artifact, we would want an evidence specialist. And I separate scene specialist from evidence specialist because, one, we're dealing with the overall conditions of the scene, and then we're looking at the actual collection of evidence. And keep in mind that typically, if there is an encounter of this nature, the federal government would likely come in, but the purpose of this presentation is to talk about the responsibilities of a first responder, should a first responder from a local agency or a non-federal agency respond. So again, is there a technical component? Is there an intact technological device, a tool of some sort, an other article, clothing, an ashtray, an intact vehicle, for our crash recoveries, and then, of course, an anomalous specimen. So for data analysis as it relates to intelligence analysis, we're looking at the frequency, activity type, evidence type, and as Keith mentioned earlier, the three types of evidence, testimonial, demonstrative, physical. We want to parse those out so we know what we're looking at in terms of, information that we can validate. Ability to identify based on class. A class would be, we have a disc or a triangle, but if there's some sort of specific marking on it or damage, then we can make a specific identification. In terms of forensics, when we look at fingerprints, we're looking at class identification, loops, arches, and whorls, but then there are the individual characteristics that identify the person, and the same could be applied to DNA. Statistical data is the information that are academic studies that allow us to replicate information to show that what we assert as cause and effect is actually cause and effect. Going further with indications analysis, now we also want to look at patterns, location patterns, and as it relates to geography, time patterns, a certain time of day that we're seeing consistently in the reports. Are there certain feature patterns that are consistent with other conditions of various aspects of the reports relative to location and time? Function, what is the UAP doing? Target interests, we talked yesterday about, special interest in atomic warfare development facilities, but there are maybe other special interest groups such as, rural versus urban areas, people of a certain, profile or a certain, group. So we want to look at what seem to be the clusters of interest relative to reports for these phenomena. Interaction patterns, what are the typical interactions that are being reported and under what conditions? And of course, effects, what are the effects that are being reported, again, under what conditions? This is why that signature collection data, everything that we're collecting in the report is important, because we're not going to be able to establish a pattern if we don't have the data. And that's the problem with historical reports, because early on, the data collection process was not as robust as we're trying to make it now. So characteristic conclusions. Based on all the information we have, we want to get to the bottom line. Is it non-physical or is it physical? Are we looking at some sort of a plasma light phenomena, or can we see a physical structure? Is it inanimate or intelligent? Are we looking at a rock or a balloon, or does it appear to be intelligently controlled? Is it contemporary or advanced? Is it a helicopter, an airplane, or a drone? Or is it advanced, something that is beyond our inventory? And so I'm going to go to the next one here. The big question is it human or non-human? So I'm going to jump back up to contemporary or advanced. We have to be very careful not to make the leap that because technology is advanced beyond our inventory, that we make the assumption that it's non-human. That is not scientific, it's not wise. It is something that we have to consider, that the technology that is emerging today was likely developed decades ago. So we have to be careful not to make that leap. So unless something comes out of a landed UAP and it doesn't look human, let's stay conservative and call it possible adversarial or other type of tech. Trends. Again, one of the things that we look to accomplish within the intention study is the patterns and trends, day versus night. An example is that we saw a shift from daytime activities to nighttime. That's important because, again, when we look at crime, if someone's encountering you during the day, they're in the light and they would be less of a threat than if they approach you at night and you don't know who they are or what they're doing. So that would be possibly a concern. Cold versus hot, that might give indications of what their need or what their interests are. Could be relative to metabolic conditions that they don't like. I know I don't like the cold. I get out of the winter as much as I can, although I'm hot right now. But those type of conditions are important, and it seems like maybe it's not important data, but it's data, and there may be a pattern there. Is there a prevalence of activities in land, air, land versus water? Single versus multiple UAP. Are there certain types of UAP that are typically alone? Are there other UAP that are typically in formation? Sound versus silence. We've had reports of a buzzing, a humming, a whistling sound. Again, is that relative to a function of the UAP, or is it could be indicative of the distance? Could it be an indication of malfunction? So those are things that give us information about the function of the UAP itself. Display versus concealment. What are the conditions that they might show themselves versus hiding? Again, we go back to day versus night. Again, nighttime isn't necessarily an indication of concealment because, again, if there are lights showing, that would be contraindicated as far as an attempt to conceal itself. Short versus long exposure. Again, Phoenix Lights is an example of a long exposure. There were people that reported structure that, that's a display type activity versus a short exposure where they're there and then it's not. That could be an indication of, hey, I don't really want you to see me, so I'm out, or I'm going to show you that I'm here, but I'm going to show you that I can get out of the way without you catching up to me. No contact versus interaction. Again, patterns relative to contact versus an interaction and what is the nature of that interaction. Trace versus no trace. What are the conditions and patterns relative to when something is left behind? Is it intentional? Or is it accidental? And that gives us an idea of what their capabilities might be. If they're making mistakes, then we're talking about a possible advanced technology. Well, we can kind of gauge what level of advancement based on whether or not we can identify that mistakes are being made. Negative versus positive effects. Now we're getting into subjective perceptions as well as benevolent versus malevolent. Let's keep in mind that as it relates to humanity, we cover the gamut. We have conservationists and we have people that are, we have our smokestacks. We have our murderers and we have our, people that don't want to, hurt a fly. So we have to be mindful of the perception of whatever this is, that it may be all of the above just like we are. In kind, we also want to be mindful that it is reasonable to look at the lens through human eyes, but to consider that there may be no matchup. So we have to keep an open mind as it relates to those types of assertions. This is a screenshot from Dr. Joshua Pearson's detectable signatures of UAP. I won't go through all of the elements of this flowchart, but what I'm trying to convey here is that he developed a very robust a flow of how to not only collect data, but proposed a methodology for documentation of the UAP, the reporting system, as well as recommendations for researchers, investigators, and policymakers. Again, must read for any researchers. So contacts and encounters. We just talked about our technological line of effort, so we're going to talk a little bit about our biological line of effort. In the event that there's any potential biological effects, we want to consider a medical evaluation and a forensic analysis. So anyone reporting contact, it's a very intimate, potentially very traumatic experience. So we want to be mindful that anyone that has this experience is likely going to be traumatized, and we need to be sensitive. No matter what the cause is or what we perceive the cause is, we need to be mindful of their emotional wellness. So here are some of the people that we would enlist, and provided that we have their consent and they're willing to go forward with this to assist with this evaluation. So in the event that there's a scene, we want to have a thorough examination of the scene, as well as the collection of any evidence. A general physician, for someone who's had contact, we want to make sure that we're getting a full account of what their overall health is. A neurologist to screen specifically for any neurological conditions that might affect perception of what they saw. Radiologists, any anomalies that might be present, not only within their bone structure, but any objects that may be present that they were not aware of. An internist, any anomalies relative to internal function, nausea, any internal issues such as cancer, any illness that might cause a physical symptoms that might translate to a cognitive expression. A surgical physician, again, to potentially remove a foreign object that is unknown. And of course, a registered nurse. We can't forget about our nurses. Our nurses provide valuable care. That is usually the first step of the emotional support in providing support to the physician and the people collecting evidence and connecting with the patient who is experiencing this trauma. Our sample collectors, anybody collecting the sample, whether it's a nurse, a physician, or other technician, that's the chain of custody. That's the first step of chain of custody that we're going to document potential evidence and the analysis. If we have a break in the chain of custody, then we're going to have an argument that there was some sort of contamination. Genetic specialist is important because there are reports that there's a particular genetic profile that seems to be of interest. We need to pay attention to that and make sure that we're collecting the data to see whether or not there's a pattern. Laboratory analysts, obviously, if there's any analysis done, we want to make sure that that person is identified and willing to speak, and any other medical specialist that applies. So as it relates to biological artifacts, we're looking for the same thing that we would look for in any other type of crime or injury: scars, marks, punctures, bruises, abrasions, lacerations, burns, fractures, hair loss, neuropathy, and any foreign object. For sample collection, all of these are samples that we would want to take from a human observer or experiencer that we're looking to screen for, one, the DNA, so a buccal swab and saliva would be sources of DNA. An oral swab is typically taken from a sexual assault victim where the victim reports contact with the mouth. Some experiencers report encounters where something was put into their mouth or around their mouth, so it's possible that some foreign substance may be detected in that manner. And it all depends on how close to the experience that this did occur. Blood, urine, stool, and hair samples would be used to identify any substances that might detect the presence or absence of drugs, alcohol, controlled substances, prescription medications. If there are any type of substances there, it might explain the cognitive expression or description of what they said that they saw. But more importantly, if there is the absence of drugs or alcohol, now we're able to validate that drugs or alcohol was not a factor. And that's why that part of it is important. Skin sample, skin scraping or samples, fingernails. Fingernails specifically in a physical confrontation, again, some people report a resisting contact. In the event that there is a physical confrontation or contact with anything else, what might be caught under the fingernails may have trace amounts of evidence that can be examined. Discharge fluid, any report of any contact with sexual organs, that is, again, very intimate, but would be likely a source of evidence to show the presence or absence of any foreign material. And of course, a biopsy if there's anything below the surface that we'd want to take a sample of. Diagnostic tests, again, a list: genetic profile, toxicology to show the presence or absence of any substances. Hormones, electrolytes, viruses would be possible indications of illness or that might translate into cognitive function. X-rays, CT scans, MRIs, functional MRI are all instrumentation for visualization of the internal body. Functional MRI allows specifically to run the scan while questions are being asked. It's innovative technology, but something that can be considered if we want to ask questions to see what's happening in the brain. Scanning electron microscope and gas chromatograph are instruments that are used to identify the chemical makeup of known or unknown substances or objects. Three ways to live and die: brain, lung, and heart, right? So we want to make sure that, or evaluate the proper function of neurological, the brain and nerve function, the cardiac and circulatory system, as well as the respiratory function, that, they're not having any breathing issues. Any defects in these functions could translate, again, into cognitive function, which would be an argument that whatever they reported was somehow affected by that. Communication skills, as we talk, now we just talked about technical and biological. We're going to talk about psychology. So this is where we get into our interviewing. When we're talking with someone, the first thing we want to know is this person right in the head, right? So a psychiatric evaluation is important to consider to rule out any mental illness that might be a factor in this report. It's also very invasive because no one wants to be accused of being crazy or lying, but we have to find a balance of making sure we're properly evaluating what is being reported, particularly when it comes to an anomalous experience. Memory recovery by way of hypnotic regression. Again, the science behind this is contested. Nevertheless, a lot of valuable information comes out through this method, so we need our professionals to continue our studies and continue to explain how this method works so that additional studies can be done to validate if possible. Deception detection, again, by cooperation with this type of information gathering, it helps to provide a validation of openness to the experiencer or anyone or any witness. And again, I understand that it's invasive and no one wants to be accused of lying. A deception detection examination is not a presumption of deception. It is also used to rule it out. Emotional support, which is the most important aspect of this, no matter what the cause is or is found to be, the wellness of any person that is reporting any traumatic experience is of paramount importance. So we have to be mindful as researchers to make sure we're providing for that. So in the event that someone presents with, with a request for the evaluation of testimony related to contact with UAP or NHI, here are some of the people that we would enlist for help. So our law enforcement professionals or our first responders, our intelligence professionals, which there's a great deal of distrust. But we have to remember that our intelligence professionals, they're human beings, they're people. They have families, they have jobs. Many of our whistleblowers, in fact, all of our whistleblowers, at least involving David Grush's complaint, are members of the intelligence community. And so these whistleblowers are coming forward out of concern, but are also concerned about what's going to happen with them. So we need to find a way to bridge the concerns of distrust with, managing the information that we can share carefully and safely. The help of a psychiatrist and psychologist. These people are especially trained in the function of the brain and can explain how someone might perceive something, how it might affect them emotionally, and how that might translate into, what might be an unclear description of what they are reporting, as well as cognitive specialists. A hypnotherapist, again, specially trained for recovery of memory, and a behavioral analyst who can observe behavior and interpret that as a means to supporting deception or truthful behavior. Behavioral analysis is not an exact science, so again, whatever the finding is, that's why polygraph examinations, computer voice stress analysis, and other deception detection techniques are typically not admissible in court because the science is not conclusive. So, this is very important. An evaluation of witness testimony must screen for misidentification, misinterpretation, or misappropriation of evidence, because every time there's an erroneous conclusion, it compromises the credibility of the witness, as well as delays the positive identification for the unknown actor. So the entire incident can be compromised if we jump the gun and make an identification prematurely. If we have something that is accurately described, but we're saying that it's something else, then that also compromises. So Proper protocols must be in place to validate evidence presented to establish facts. Image data needs to be presented with the provenance of the original image. The physical evidence needs to be analyzed against quantitative confirmatory protocols. Collectors, analysts, and other first-hand witnesses need to be willing to testify publicly. So when we talk about witnesses, we want to make a distinction between, is this a direct witness or a second-hand witness? We have a lot of second-hand witnesses that seem to be presented as first-hand witnesses, so we need to separate that. That doesn't mean that second-hand witnesses don't have value. It's just that we have to understand the context under which they're providing the information. Is it an adult or a child? Adults, as we go through life, we have our replication of things that we see, we have our memories and our experiences that may confabulate. We may take an experience from earlier in life and apply it to something that we recently saw, or vice versa, we create confusion, and as well as we're motivated by money and other things, attention. Now, children want attention, but children typically don't have the experience to make the type of convincing presentation of a truthful event when they're lying. It's just, there are some pathologies out there, but to a lesser degree. So a child witness is an important distinction when we're looking at witnesses. And I want to highlight the Ariel case and the other 200 cases. Preston Dennett put together a great summary of cases involving schools. Is the witness an involved person? When we're involved in a traumatic situation, visual scope becomes very narrow. Our sounds become amplified. Everything seems to be bigger and more terrifying when you're involved. If you're chased by a dog, the teeth are going to seem like they're 5 inches long. And then, of course, if we find that it's only an inch long, is that person a liar? No, it's just that because they're so involved, everything is amplified. So we have to be careful about the involved person's perception being labeled as a lie when it may just be a reflection of their emotional state. Is the person a government executive, intelligence, flight personnel, law enforcement, commercial executive? The skill set of the witness is also an important factor to consider, which will inform us on their ability to provide, comprehensive descriptions. That doesn't mean that, a civilian can't do the same, but it's important information to have for context. Researchers, experiencers, technical specialists, again, important to know for context. So for observation, was it visual? Was it an eyewitness with no instrumentation? Do we have video, photo? Do we have a diagram that was done from memory? Do we have radar data? Do we have electronic data or digital data? Optical instruments such as binoculars or theodolite, which was used years ago. Hyperspectral photography such as alternate light or filtered light. Sonar, which will be used to visualize objects underground or underwater. Observer perspective, is the observer on land? Is the observer in the air? Is the observer underwater? So perspective of the observer is going to be very important. Now, when we look at the actual observations, compare that with the position of the UAP. Is the UAP in the air? Is the UAP on the ground? Is the UAP underwater? So depending on the difference between the observer and the UAP is going to be important to give an assessment of what the observation was. Do we have date, time, location, and general conditions of the scene? Is the witness able to provide that information? Are there features that are described as anomalous? Is the function of the UAP anomalous? Was there a visualization of a biological entity? Was there a report of communication? Again, this starts getting into the far end of contact, but as we look at the number of reports, the important part here is data collection. Whether we're able to prove it or not is irrelevant to the data collection process, and that is an important part of the investigation. If it doesn't make sense, it doesn't matter, collect the information. Physical interaction, what is the nature, as much in detail. Physiological effects, were there any? Environmental effects, what, if anything, do we see in terms of changes to the environment? So as it relates to attestation, to attest, we want to make sure that there is an official report. We want to make sure that there's an affidavit, a statement that the information they're providing is true and accurate to the best of their ability. Their willingness to testify, both officially and publicly. Now, public testimony, there's some entanglements there. Are they doing it for attention? Are they doing it for clicks, to monetize? Official testimony is ultimately where we want to go because we're really focused on, validating the information to persuade or verify that this is a real issue that we need to dedicate time to. This is a model that I've developed to establish witness veracity. There's a confusion between the term credibility and veracity, and that's why I put this model together. And it was adapted from a model that we used for the intention study. So I'm going to start at the foundation here of any issue where we're trying to establish reality. So we have our three types of evidence: testimonial, demonstrative, and physical evidence. We have to look at the manner in which that evidence is collected. So this is specific for witness testimony. So when we're talking to a person, we have to consider different factors in terms of the conditions, such as their culture, their personality. People from Africa and Asia, in the culture, there is eye contact is often seen to be as a sign of disrespect when dealing with people that are in a position of authority. So we have to be mindful of the different differences of people in different cultures. Introverts versus extroverts will have similar differences in how they present. Environmental conditions, is it cold in there? They might be closing their body language as opposed to perceiving that they're just being close and not wanting to share information. How are we asking questions? Are we asking open-ended questions or closed-ended questions? Are we contaminating the interview by offering information that they're not providing? Behavioral indicators are, again, anatomical and physiological cues that might indicate how they're responding to questions, neurological, the movement of the eyes, and then, of course, we're looking for a determination as to whether it's coming from, their cognitive function. Are they pulling from the memory, or does it seem like they're creating the information? Quantification pertains to our academic studies that show replication of cause and effect. That's how we make our decisions in judgments. Credibility pertains to believability, which is, either we believe that they're being deceptive, they're being truthful, but they might be an error, or an assessment of consistency. Are they changing their responses over time? Veracity pertains to accuracy, and that is our ability to determine the credibility of the consistency of the witness, along with an independent corroboration from a separate source. And once we have all the information here, we're able to develop a characteristic profile. So based on the totality of everything, all the information that we have, this is what we think that we have. And that's a better way to assess veracity, which is by accuracy, whether this is actually a fact versus the intent of believability of being truthful or not. Sociological, our line of effort, we have our investigations, our law and policy development, funding, research awareness, and protection. So these are just, again, a list of the people that we would, in our sociological aspect, we have our investigators looking at how we want to mobilize resources, our medical evaluations, emotional support, laboratory analysis, reporting, and then a summary of that report. Our forensic results, here we're just looking for cognitive, audio, video imagery, physics, chemistry, and biology, as well as our toxicology, so a review of all the forensics involved. Corroboration, we have our corroboration by way of independent witnesses, multi-perspective imagery, so our multimodal detection systems, our multiple location reports that might show patterns of what people independently are reporting by documentation, and related research studies. So ongoing research is greatly important. In terms of law policy, again, the National Defense Authorization Act, our congressional liaisons, maintaining that communication with our congressional leaders, providing guidance on policy that effectively represent what we're trying to accomplish, and maintaining that communication by way of meetings with government, academic, and private sector. We need to fund our efforts for signature detection, research and development, equipment and training, as well as our government operations. We need to staff, both through our government and through our contractors who are providing support in this initiative. So as we look at our research, we're looking at basically three different areas here. Our features, actions, and effects, both of UAP technology and our occupants. What is the description of either the technology or the occupants? What are the actions? What are they doing, whether it's the technology or the occupants? And what effect is the technology or the occupants having? That's kind of the characterization that we're trying to get to determine intent. So awareness and response training, we need to go run the gamut from local, county, state, federal, international, and multinational. And as far as international, we can't just operate in a different country according to our own interests. We need to collaborate with our partners around the world. That's how we're going to collect the best data to get a global perspective. We need to protect our whistleblowers and people who want to contribute to understanding this phenomena. We need to understand how our investigations are conducted, not just for misconduct, but for our research processes that are covered by our protected and classified systems. We need to have legal support for our whistleblowers and people who are afraid to come forward because of concerns of legal ramifications. This is a flow chart that I put together that really goes step by step as to what should happen in the event that we have a scene. So if we have a scene, first thing we want to do is make sure that we have providing for safety. We want to, once we render the scene safe as much as we can, we want to conduct a thorough examination, collecting documentation, both documentary as well as through photography and video. We want to make sure that we have a diagram, a 3D diagram if possible. We want to make sure that any evidence that is at the scene is properly collected, transported to an approved storage facility, and prepared for analysis. Every aspect of the investigation needs to be covered by a report and then later summarized. Once those reports are completed, there needs to be a full-on review, and this is the important thing. All information needs to be reviewed before information is released to the public. Premature release of information to the public results in embarrassment, results in a discrediting of the witness, discrediting of the incident, and discrediting of the evidence that might be used for further validation of other incidents. Interagency information, coordination and information. This is basically a visual representation of all of the lines of effort that I've presented here today. This is just an appeal that no matter if you're a government contractor, a government worker, a researcher, an academic, we have to be mindful that we are working in our lines of effort as our subject matter expertise, but if we don't share information, both within our various nations, but globally, we're not going to get a global understanding of this phenomenon, and we're going to be very limited. So again, collaboration is a key focus here. Continuation of education and awareness. UAP is present. It's a key assumption. The release of the videos in 2017 and the government's acknowledgement of that in 2018 is a validation that this is something that has been disclosed. So again, confirmation versus disclosure. UAP is here, but we need to now look at alternative response plans should be developed for positive as well as negative scenarios for engagement with NHI or whoever's operating these. So strategic response recommendations. We're so tangled in the discussion on whether or not this is true that we're not having enough of a discussion as to what do we do about it in the event that it is true. Those are two separate issues. We should be developing response to just like a planet-ending asteroid or a pandemic. Already been through that, right? COVID would be an idea that, this may not be something that we need to retard any longer. We need to prepare for the possibility of a non-human civilization. We already know that there are extraterrestrials here. It's us. We're on Mars right now, and we have to presume that because we're there, somebody else may be here, and we have reports that they're here. So regardless of the preponderance or sufficient amount of evidence that it is a thing, we still should be developing a strategy. So these are extreme, but we should be, for adverse intention, we should be developing avenues of combat to defend our existence. This would be a fight response. We should have a plan for escape to preserve our existence, recognizing that combat is lost. This would be a flight response. Or accept that there's nothing we can do to change the anticipated result of their adverse actions to subjugate us or exterminate us. That would be a freeze response. All of this, the target fight or flight responses are to establish a safe space for re-engagement. This is about preservation of ourselves. And then here we have the benevolent intention, again, being mindful of the context of benevolent versus malevolence. Maximizing understanding of contact protocol. We don't want to make a presumption that this is hostile, based unless it's very clear that there's a destructive nature to it. Ensuring that we display peaceful gestures for the exchange of communications, and that we recognize gestures of assistance. We want to offer opportunities for diplomatic relations and collaboration in a safe manner. So we want to maximize awareness and response preparedness for UAP NHI contact. Strategic meetings should be ongoing with the government, academic, and private sector institutions to roundtable strategies for surveillance, counterintelligence, evidence collection, interception, redirection, and mitigation based on comprehensive study of UAP NHI profiles, activities, and effects. So as we wrap up here today, I just, again, want to appeal to everyone that's involved in this research to collaborate together. Let's not let the dollar get in the way. Let's not get reputation get in the way. Let's work together to really understand this, this phenomena globally. Thank you for your time.
What a lecture. I tell you, again, I work with a lot of law enforcement professionals, including the co-founder of the Debrief, Tim McMillan, former law enforcement. And those kinds of perspectives, again, in terms of UAP response training, not just for the public safety aspect of this, but again, applied more broadly, I just think that that is so very important. We're a little behind schedule right now, and I think that we've got some issues also with our stream, and I realize there are a lot of questions probably. We had a good 10 or 11 there in the Hoover app. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to move to the next lecture, but what I do recommend, Sean and Keith, probably if you can answer those questions in the app, and also I encourage people who have questions to communicate with them during the break, which will be coming up here in a little bit. We're going to be probably running long because we've got to get to Courtney Bauer's presentation. Courtney, by the way, a Debrief contributor and also someone who is one of our bright and up-and-coming researchers who is applying some very fascinating research and prowess to this topic. Courtney's approach involves mixed methods research with an interest in issues of communication and incommensurability between distant extraterrestrial civilizations. Say that 3 times fast, I dare you. His research draws on his academic and professional background, including philosophical inquiry, statistical modeling, and extended overseas experience. He's completing a social sciences doctorate and expects to pursue a career in research. I expect to hear more from him, of course, about UAP here and now for the SCU. Is Courtney here present, or is he joining us remotely? I believe. Let's find out where he is. And I think our stream may be down, unfortunately, so for those who are having an issue right now accessing the stream, that would be why they aren't going to be able to hear me at home. But if anybody here happens to be logging that would be what the issue is. So give them a moment. They may have an issue with regard to getting the feed up and going, but we'll have that worked out here hopefully in just a moment. So stand by. We'll have information here hopefully soon. All right, so we've got this all worked out. Courtney is not here on site. He is going to be joining us virtually. But we got to get him on Zoom, and we had a minor issue going on right there. In the meantime, very briefly, I'm going to address something because many of our participants have been asking questions. And another thing we could do we still have Dr. Keith Taylor joining us right now? He is online. Do we have Courtney yet? No. Okay. We probably could take a couple of questions from the last lecture. So let's go ahead and let's do that right now because we had so many people who were asking questions. Those who were here who had questions in-house, come back to the microphone. Bob, I think you had one too. We might go to a couple of those first. Although actually a good lead-off, tell you the truth, that I wanted to get in here. Because we now have 13 of these piling up. Yeah, let's go ahead. And Sean will bring you on up here. We will go ahead and do our Q&A. Let's start it off. If you don't hear us, they'll get you up in just a moment. Hang on just 1 second.
Is that on? Hello. Sean, I want to thank you for an extremely comprehensive overview. That was wonderful. And I wanted to thank you also for stressing the need for compassion because, Rich Hopp and I were talking about yesterday how experiencers are traumatized twice, right? First by the experience, then by the interview afterwards. But I'm going to add a third, which is social media after that. So it's really, really important to have that compassionate component. But I actually want to ask you about desensitization. Keith and I talked about this a little bit at Lou's house last year. But we're sitting here where I remember in the 60s, astronauts used to be put in a centrifuge, shaker tables. the infamous neutral buoyancy lab. And so all of that is intended to desensitize them so that, when they go through trauma themselves, so the question is, do you folks have plans to desensitize law enforcement, maybe by, I don't know, make them watch Will Smith and Men in Black 100 times? Or I remember during the Cold War era, we used to have Soviet aircraft identification cards that we'd play poker with so that you would get used to seeing those different types of aircraft. And I'm wondering, Richard Dolan has 34 different images or diagrams of NHI or ET, whatever you want to call them. So can we implement something like that just to reduce the ontological shock of the law enforcement officer seeing NHI out in the broad arm?
Sure. Thank you for that question. It's a great question. So the process of, desensitization, getting acclimated to this discussion, we want to normalize it. So I think it's much simpler than that. I think what we need to do is just have normal conversations where we're focusing on the data. If we take the perspective that we can't prove what is being reported, therefore we're not going to look at it, then we're going to remove our ability to gather the information and connect the dots the way that we need to in order to present the information in a way that's meaningful and transformative to the understanding of the person that may not have any exposure or is very skeptical. Skepticism is good. Because again, we don't want to jump the gun, but if we want to normalize the conversation, then we need to have normal conversations. It's, watching the movies and all that can be confusing because the movies are made in a fictional format. We need to have real conversations about real reports that are being made, and we need to talk about the patterns that are being emerged that are hard to explain. How do you explain 60 children that are reporting similar phenomena, descriptions of vehicles that were reported in the 1950s and 60s, halfway across the world, generations apart? There's explanations for it, but you have to ask yourself the question, what is your leading hypothesis? So normal conversations would be my response to that.
Sean, thank you so much for that presentation. Well, the way I understand what you were doing is giving an overview of the wide arsenal of techniques and tests that we have available in the law enforcement world to investigate these things, not necessarily advocating every single one of those tests in every single case. Maybe that's a misunderstanding of what you're doing, but the question is, if I had had a UAP experience that had any fragmentary traumatic element to it, and I had watched your presentation prior to reporting it, I think there's probably very little chance that I would have wanted to, because it's an intimidating set of tools that you have at your disposal. Is there a way of training and designing the law enforcement response to this in a way that if a person did watch a training video for law enforcement prior to reporting, they would not feel totally intimidated out of wanting to do it?
Absolutely. So if we look at response to sexual assault, a very similar set of dynamics in terms of the emotional impact of a traumatic experience. And law enforcement for years has failed sexual assault survivors by being skeptical of what happened, depending on how the person was dressed or how they conducted themselves or whether they were a drug user or intoxicated. They start to form a bias that they may not realize is further traumatizing the victim. So I would say that model is something that we should follow, that when we're dealing with someone with a traumatic experience of any kind, we have to bridge that gap. We need our public safety responders to use the same training that they're required to undergo for sexual assault training for this type of phenomena. The information, that's why the awareness part of this was so important, because we know that sexual assault happens. It's more prevalent than UAP, reported UAP encounters. So as we talk about how many reports there are and look at the patterns, and establish that this is something that is being acknowledged, by the government, and we're seeing patterns here. It's again, it comes down to preparedness. As we understand, as public safety responders understand the emotional state of anyone dealing with any type of trauma, then they can start there. The experience or the person experiencing the trauma also, I think this training would also help or being aware of that public safety responders are being provided this training will help. The communication is very important, so it's a two-way street.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you again, Sean, for jumping back up. I'm glad we were able to get to a couple of those questions because I think we saw a huge response to that lecture, and there were, again, questions piling up in the Whova app. I would recommend, Dr. Taylor and Sean, that you interact with folks there on Whova and maybe be able to get some of those questions. There was quite an interest in that lecture.